Well, I think you present a lot of really good lessons for anybody who wants to follow a similar path, and I hope some inspiration as well. But, you did your first triathlon, which was an Olympic, recognizing that you were probably undertrained for it. And then when you decided to go ahead and do the full Ironman, you registered for a half leading up to that as well. And you gave yourself, it sounds like at least a year of lead time for Ironman France when you decided to start.
Yeah, it was just over it was actually, I think it was 13 months.
Mm-hmm. And do you think if you hadn't done the Olympic prior to that, do you think you could have done a full Ironman in 13 months had you not had prior triathlon experience?
I mean, not without having done the half Ironman, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
The Olympic I probably could have skipped. I feel like if I had, someone said to me, look, you really have to train. Yeah. And then I went right to the half Ironman, and then I went to the Ironman, that would have been fine.
Mm-hmm.
The Olympic was mentally a really great sort of win for me. But as far as training, relatively speaking, I didn't train at all for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself didn't, yes, I could have gone on to do Ironman without that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also started doing Tough Mudder and Civilian Military Combine, and I also started a yoga teacher training while I was training for the Ironman. So, I mean, I started just piling it all on.
Yeah. And during all this time while you were training, what was your Crohn's doing?
Disappeared, basically. So what happened was I got out of the hospital that one bad night, decided to change things, change my diet, all that stuff. That was in January. Mm-hmm. 4 months later, I was off my meds completely. And 2 months later was the first triathlon.
Wow. So just 2 months after that, after the diet change, is that?
No, 2 months after getting off my meds. So 6 months after the sort of the real change.
Okay.
So I was actually a vegetarian when I did the first triathlon.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. So yeah, as a physician, I work in the emergency department and I see sick people all day, every day. I see, a lot of very healthy people that come in for traumatic accidents, like sprained ankles or cuts from using tools or a broken glass in the sink. So there's that group of people that comes in for trauma, but there's a whole nother set of people that comes in with sickness and illness. And, personally, I find it frustrating. I get frustrated for people sometimes. Everybody has their own story, their own history, their own background, their own definition of who they are and the things that they do every day that supports that self-definition. And, I see people with Crohn's. I see people who I think may have Crohn's, or other bowel diseases. And then I think one of the complex things about that disease and what it does to people is that nobody can see it. The GI doc maybe can see it after he puts you to sleep and inserts an endoscope, but nobody can see what you're going through. And that psychological component, I think can be very challenging for people and gets people very frustrated and not thinking that they can do the sorts of things that you did. Could you maybe talk about that, if there was a psychological component about maybe people not believing that you're in pain or having self-doubt?
Yeah, I mean, how many people are like, oh, it's just really bad gas, right?
Right.
It's...
Yeah. Yeah, well, you were in the hospital twice.
You just kind of give up explaining it. It's not worth explaining it for most cases because they're just not going to get it. And the pain, this is something that I think people don't really understand. So and you probably actually can explain this better than me, but there's no real pain receptors in your intestines. You could burn them, you could cut them, and you wouldn't feel it. But if you stretch the intestines, it's like the second most painful thing there is after bone pain. Mm-hmm. So, and that's all it is all the time. Your intestines are just stretching and trying to get this food through you, and it's impossible. So you can describe it, and it just makes you kind of like shy away from things. And I was never, I was someone who had symptoms of urgency, which is a really common thing where you just you can almost not make it to the bathroom sometimes. Mm-hmm. But I know people who had that much, much worse than I did. And those are the people who they don't go out, they're afraid, or they plan where are their bathrooms along their route to work.
Right.
So you just end up not talking about it. And that's a big problem too, because it's a disease that people are embarrassed to talk about. And the information sharing that comes from having an illness like this is what makes people better.
Mm-hmm. So information sharing, like what you're doing right now, or with other people that have the disease, or with a good physician?
Well, people think that it's a young person's disease. So there's just this feeling of helplessness. The drugs really don't work. They suppress the symptoms, and then your body kind of keeps going if you don't change. So just one of the most effective things in my change was grass-fed butter.
Interesting.
Really high fats and butter. And butter, as you know, butyric acid, it's amazingly anti-inflammatory. It's an amazingly nourishing food for your body. And just telling someone, eat a whole bunch of butter just every day, put some butter on something. I've seen amazing changes with that alone.
Yeah.
You know, so, and that's, you don't read that necessarily anywhere. I mean, now you might,
Sure.
But at the time, it's like trying to share that information about what works and what doesn't. And when someone is telling them that what worked for them was changing their diet, which is like, wow, shocker, a GI, situation, a digestive problem that can be affected by diet.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, well, yeah.
Yeah. You know, I can't tell you how many times I try to take the opportunity when it seems appropriate to have a little dietary intervention with someone in the ER, but giving someone advice to change their diet is going to backfire if they're not in the right stage of change to do that. You know, if they're in a pre-contemplative stage, if it's never occurred to them that what they're eating is contributing to their symptoms, it's a different kind of education. But,
well, and to be honest with you, I'm not trying to attack anybody, but I think nutritionists are actually part of the problem as well, because the training for nutrition, or for a lot of nutritionists, is not very holistic, and it's sort of like this by the book method. It doesn't really look at the person. And not only that, I feel like there's lack of currency sometimes. So I had a client who has Crohn's. So, you know, I work with a lot of people with Crohn's now, and his doctor sort of made him see their in-house nutritionist, and one of the things that this person told him was that a breakfast of a whole wheat English muffin with peanut butter on it was a really great breakfast for him. And I was so upset by that when he told me that. And he knew that that was a bad suggestion. And this is the problem with that. Most people would be like, well, it's whole wheat, so that's cool. And what's wrong with peanut butter? Maybe nothing, but peanut butter has a lot of sugar. That's one thing. But what no nutritionist ever sort of brings up is that 50% of peanut butter samples peanut butter has ochratoxin and an aflatoxin. And aflatoxin is a mold toxin that is really, really well correlated with Crohn's.
Interesting.
So yeah, and it is really interesting, and that's based on a lot of research. And don't eat peanut butter. You know, it's like, and I told someone that recently, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I heard you should only have creamy, not crunchy." It's like, no, that's not the point. So, you know, nutritionists don't help that aspect of it. Not all nutrition, of course. Like, they're actually, to be honest, IIN, which is the Integrative Institute of Nutrition, is a really good program, which does help a lot of people. You can fix so much with food.
Yeah, I have several friends who've gone through the IIN program, and I love talking with them because they've got a broad knowledge base. They're very open-minded and really looking towards treating the whole person as a healthy being and not just looking at one single element.
Right. Yeah, exactly.